Given the deluge of reports, notices and amendments from the football authorities affecting the football agents world in recent months, we bring to you this special episode of The Agents Angle with me, Jonathan Booker.
And me, Peter Paleologus. In December 2024, FIFA released what is for many the much anticipated annual FIFA Football Agents Report. And as such, we're going to take a closer look at that report for any trends, anomalies, problems or notable elements that affect agents in the football agent world.
Needless to say that our examination of this report may well highlight some very questionable interpretations by FIFA and things that agents may need to note.
Not to come on this episode, The Agents Angle.
And as some say, much like buses, you wait ages for one and then two or three come along at pretty much the same time. So yes, this is an additional episode of The Agents Angle recorded on Wednesday the 15th of January, coming to you directly off the back of episode 52. And that is because there was just so much content to cover in the previous episode of what was quite an in-depth and technical nature that we decided to split it across two episodes, if only to make it more digestible. Needless to say that we are just hoping that FIFA don't in the intervening period release yet another circular to clarify Circular 1919 regarding the changes to the FIFA agents exam, as they did in 2024 with Circular 1874 coming just 10 days or so after Circular 1873.
Sorry to break it to you, Jonathan. FIFA will have to come out with a new circular or memo at least to clarify the arrangements of the new remote football agents exam for 2025, which from what we've seen in that recent circular, you can do at home going forward. Further, we have to remember that FIFA is always publishing circulars, and as agents, as football agents, it's part of our job to be across them, especially if they relate to the RSTP, regulations for the status and transfer players, the FFAR, the FIFA Football Agent Regulations, tribunals, compliance issues, and even in future, if it does come about, especially once the caps issue is determined by the European Court of Justice, anything to do with the FIFA clearinghouse. So it is part of our job to be aware of circulars.
But as I mentioned in the introduction, the purpose of this episode is to focus on one thing, and that is the annual FIFA Agents Report. And this edition of the report was released, at least to our knowledge, by FIFA on the 19th of December 2024. But for me, it didn't seem to come with the usual fanfare or even self-praise by some at FIFA, as has been the case with the release of previous FIFA agent reports, which, correct me if I'm wrong, Peter, go back some 4, 5 or maybe even 6 years now.
Yes, Jonathan, it's been a report that's been coming out for several years. I'm not sure if it's 5 or 6, but has been coming annually. I actually always look forward to it because I'm very interested, not just in what the football agent industry is about, but it also covers smaller markets and what it says about them. I know that from our discussion, we're not all agreeable with the data or statistics that are in the report when you look at it, because you can read a few different ways, or if you interrogate the report carefully, there are gaps. However, I do like the trends listed in the report, and I'm looking at the current report now, the December 2024, which, sorry, our listeners, because we had the break, have come a bit late to dissect it, but I like little information like this. I'll give you an example. In terms of players, New Zealand players use the most agents, over 52.6%. Players from Denmark, 43.6%, and Norway completes the top three with 40.2%. And I find that sort of thing quite interesting, Jonathan.
And as you know, Peter, I like diving into these reports as well, if only it's a slightly sadistic way akin to self-flagellation. But compared to last year's report, this one I think is more thoughtful, if not actually useful and constructive in some ways. And I think FIFA dropped in this edition some, although not all, of the anti-agent rhetoric and tone exhibited in the past. And that's maybe because the ECJ ruling on FFAR is expected in 2025, and the rulings thus far in other courts and jurisdictions, the majority arguably haven't gone FIFA's way. So before we dig into the detail of the report, I just wanted to make some general observations about the report And these mainly relate to the recently revised FFAR, which we covered in the previous episode. So, to start, some of the more general things I noted were: firstly, what I view as a bit askew, if not contradiction, by FIFA on what are deemed football agent services. And this is when compared to FIFA's own definitions in the FFAR. Because in this report, football agent services are effectively defined as, and I quote, any representation of players and or clubs in employment related and transfer related negotiations. Now, this for me is a description that could arguably include the likes of commercial representation, which under FFAR definitions are arguably declared as other services and thus not football agent services. But this isn't the first time FFAR related documents from FIFA have seemingly contradicted one another. Secondly, there seems an effort by FIFA to skirt around the fact that in 2023, agent commissions on international transactions decreased by, get this, 22%. Yet FIFA seem to be keen to stress in the report how high the figure is by presenting it in other ways, and thus continue to attack agents as a collective. And with that, we go back to that anti-agent rhetoric and narrative that FIFA have used going back many years, in effect the FFAR era as a whole, which has left the agent regulatory space fractured and largely in confusion. Then there is reference to the football agent section on the FIFA website, which I acknowledge over the last 6 to 9 months has seen some improvements. However, it's not always up to date. And at the time of recording, there is no mention of the likes of the latest agent working group meeting. And on that point of the AWG, in the report, it is stated that the section on the FIFA website will cover matters in relation to the AWG, and I quote, the range of topics that have been discussed and a number of measures that have either been implemented in the aftermath or are in the process of being put into place. Well, that's news to us, because to me, saying in effect we had a meeting doesn't constitute what was discussed or achieved.
Yes, I agree, Jonathan. We need to see more real-time updates on all these matters, especially on meeting minutes, circular and other information. It has to be real-time here. That can be easily done very, very quickly to all the stakeholders. I think FIFA has considered, though, in this report, feedback from stakeholders and has been refining the football agents report. We have to take into account that now we've got the European Court of Justice challenge, and also we've had changes to the FFAR or suspended provisions as well. So FIFA may be toning down its rhetoric, I think, in my view, to a more transactional report, which mainly just highlights key data in the agent's business. Now, you mentioned the FAWG, FIFA Agents Working Group. Do those agents or agent representatives get a snapshot about the upcoming FIFA Agent Report? As you said, we don't know because there's no real-time update to say have, haven't, and nothing's been conveyed to us about that. Now, you mentioned a very interesting point in this report in terms of the 2023 agent commissions on international transactions decreasing by 22%. Now, we don't know the reasons for that, but from my point of view, there's obviously a lot of factors at play. We know the profitability and sustainability rules and financial fair play rules have had an impact with clubs. We know that loans have happened a lot, especially in the younger players market. And also a lot of clubs are not spending big on transfers, so that also feeds into agent fees. What does amaze me is that this report highlights there's a lot of transactions that don't involve an agent as well. Some players are doing their own deals, maybe. Club contracts in a lot of leagues are standardized. They may not want an agent. Or even some players are using the player union services, whether it's a PFA or FIFA Pro or something like that. But I think we have to remember, Jonathan, that the TMS, transfer matching system, only catches service fees paid for club agents in international transfers mainly, and therefore it may not take into account domestic transfers, renegotiation of employment contracts, and other service fees paid to player agents. So this report does not have, I would say, the full revenue of football agents For me, the report is more about context, interesting nuances and tidbits and trends under the recent FFAR and also what's happening in the market generally with players, Jonathan.
I think the report's very important and it could go into far greater depth. But now let's have a look at the more intricate details and, dare I say, the statistics. And I stress statistics and not data. There are both some interesting nuggets in this report, but also quite a few things to query and demand further consideration, if not clarification on. So firstly, the topic of licensing and matters such as the exam and CPD. According to the report, FIFA reportedly received almost 20,000 licensing applications in the 2024 reporting period, but apparently only just over half of those actually sat the exam. As such, last year, approximately 11,000 sat the exam with a global pass rate of just over 40%, which FIFA and others claim makes it a very rigorous exam. Well, as I've said before, that pass rate is far higher than pre-2015. And as well as that, there are still huge question marks over the fairness, consistency and applicability of the FFAR exam. So as we said on the last episode, maybe we'll see changes with regards to the exam on that, but that still isn't clear. There were also some interesting stats regarding the rejection of license applications, which totaled 274. So just over 1% of the total applications. But notably, out of that 274, 78 were rejected as they were from officials, employees, or those who had a connection with the likes of FIFA, a member association, a league, or a club. And that is something we want to come back to on a future episode and the whole context of conflicts of interest. But also, 12 rejections of candidate applications were on the grounds of them performing football agent services in the 24 months prior to their application. And yes, I said 12 out of over 20,000. So maybe a case of FIFA needs to look harder because we and others see examples of this so frequently out there, whether it be on social media or elsewhere. Then on to the CPD related statistics of the report, which again reveals that 41% of licensed agents are seemingly legacy agents who didn't need to sit the exam because they were licensed pre-2015, as they need 40 CPD credits annually rather than just the 20 credits. And FIFA are keen to stress in this report the release of new CPD modules in 2023-2024, which we welcome. But just to add a bit of context to that, those new modules weren't actually available, I recall, until the last quarter of 2024. And a lot of agents weren't aware because it wasn't openly announced till later on. So some would claim better late than never, but I would argue they have little or no relevance to this report and the reporting period. So arguably, FIFA are being somewhat disingenuous with presenting these new CPD modules as part of this report.
Yes, those CPD modules are new initiatives. Now, you mentioned FIFA revealed in its latest report 40.4% of the 10,000, nearly 11,000 candidates who sat the exam in 2024 successfully passed. That's actually quite high, I would say. I recall pre-2015, we had some exams, especially here in Australia and in some other countries I knew, were only 3% passed. Obviously closed book exams, so there's a big difference there. You also mentioned the licensing applications, close to 20,000 license applications in 2024, but only around about close to 11,000 sat. A lot of people registered. A lot of people didn't turn up on the day or decided to do the next one. There's a difference between turning up on the day and actually registering. The report's interesting because previous reports didn't have that much about licensing. This one does, and it's slowly providing a lot more information on what's happening out there in the licensed FIFA football agent ecosystem.
And I think that's an apt point that the report also looks at enforcement and compliance, which I think we both agree is key in any form of regulation if it is to work effectively. And in my view, the failure of enforcement and compliance is why agent regulations has largely failed in the past. And in relation to the exam and licensing, we have the statistic that 973 candidates were found by FIFA to have breached exam rules. Something to keep in mind when we've recently seen Circular 1919 and the announcement of an online exam from 2025 onwards. So, roughly 9% were found by FIFA to have breached exam rules, which again possibly skews the related statistics further, not least the pass rate. But what makes that even more interesting is that FIFA have been creative, shall we say, in what breaching exam rules entails. Because in this report, it seems that FIFA, in typical fashion, skew this by including such things as failing to pay the exam fee or even failing to attend in these numbers. But how do you breach exam rules when you haven't even sat the exam? Possibly FIFA have done this to deflect from the fact they don't know how many actually cheated in the exam, or that the fact there has been more cheating and subterfuge than they would care to report. And maybe this is a reason for the change in the exam format in the revised version of the FFAR. It's also reported that during the period covered by the report, FIFA opened 21 investigations into those who failed to meet eligibility requirements. Now, I'm guessing this is after a license was granted, but the report doesn't make that 100% clear. But I find this confusing as what are the eligibility requirements we're talking about? Are these circumstances that have changed for the agent, a subset of the applications rejected, or is it in regards to things that FIFA originally missed in the application process? And as we reported at the time, thousands of agents were provisionally suspended in October 2024. As it transpired, the total number, according to the report, was 2,616 to be exact. Some were for non-payment of the annual license fee, whilst others were for failing to meet CPD requirements. But it would also appear from the statistics in the report that some of the suspensions were for both of those, as although maths isn't my best subject, 1,777 plus 1,387 doesn't add up to 2,616. And of these suspensions, 1,825 of the licenses were reinstated once the matters were rectified, but 406 were withdrawn. However, that would leave, bear with me on this one, 385 still suspended or unresolved on the 5th of December 2024, which was the point these figures were taken for this report. Which is strange, as matters of this kind, with suspensions, have to be rectified within 60 days according to Article 17 of the FFAR. The 5th of December falls outside of that.
An interesting analysis. You mentioned exam rule breaches. Now, we know and we've mentioned that FIFA now will take a centrally controlled focus of the exam process. This report talks about 973 candidates breaching exam rules, leading to rejection of their applications. I would actually like to see how that was reported. Was it the national associations? Was there an invigilators report identifying these individuals and the breaches and how they were investigated? Because it had to come from somewhere. And we should note here that the FAs and the invigilators, the football associations staff who may have managed the taking of the exams, they don't do the marking. FIFA does the marking because it goes through the exam portal. So this is interesting to see what were these breaches and what happened here. I was very interested to see about the licensing updates. As you mentioned, there were over 2,616 to be precise, licenses suspended because of non-payment or failure to meet CPD requirements that you mentioned, Jonathan. Just under 2,000 for non-payment and about 1,400 for CPD. Now, this is where a lot of the confusion is, that agents need to check the portal or the directory, which is not available, to see what they need to do with CPD and also when they have to pay their annual fee. I would also say, and we talked about circulars these last few episodes, that the FAWG, the People Agent Work Group, and agent associations also have a responsibility here to remind members, because a lot of members don't always check the portal because you don't have to upload your agreement. So you're not looking at it as much as probably you would if you had to with more compliance requirements. They should remind their members of renewal dates and CPD completion dates. The onus is not just on FIFA, it's also on agent associations, in my view. There was a lot of suspended licenses, obviously maybe because of non-payment, and we know that people were reinstated after paying or doing the CPD. But there were quite a few licenses permanently withdrawn. I don't know the context to that. Maybe agents joining clubs, or agents just deciding not doing any deals, or maybe some other reasons. This report talks also about FIFA opened 1,606 investigations regarding a potential failure to comply with their eligibility requirements, and several individuals prevented to take the exam for having provided football agent services without a license within 24 months of applying from taking the exam. I know with the English FA, they have any suspended license. They have a register of all of the cases they hear in terms of agent matters and may suspend or discipline or reprimand certain agents. I haven't seen from FIFA any register of unlicensed agents that during an investigation were found to be doing the wrong thing. Is that something we need to look at? Because we've got all these stats, but we don't know who's doing what. I don't know if FIFA will support this. Obviously, there's confidentiality and all these issues at play, but we've got a lot of stats. I would actually like to see, which individuals are really breaching the rules here and should be precluded. That clubs, players, other agents, other stakeholders should be not dealing with these people. That's just a thought that should come and flow off compliance and enforcement outcomes, Jonathan.
Yeah, the FA in England have improved greatly on that with the transparency with regards to agent sanctions and what people are sanctioned for, both to highlight the more extreme cases and the more, shall we say, basic errors and oversights. But FIFA listing those is an interesting one because it is in the FFAR that they can. But then again, when we can't even get a listing of licensed football agents, I think we're a long way from getting a register of suspended ones. And just to conclude, that section on agent numbers, according to the report, as of the 5th of December 2024, there were a total of 7,558 FIFA licensed football agents. But we know from the report that just under 65% of licensed agents were authorised by FIFA to represent minors.
And maybe a lot of people have overlooked this. The gender, 95% of agents are male, 5% are female agents, and I'll talk a bit later about the women's football upswing in transfers there and agent fees. An interesting stat was licensed agents, the average age was 42 years. I know a lot of younger people are trying to get into the agents game, but I think at the end, players, clubs, they want to see experienced people, and that sort of signifies that age average.
But now onto the big area of transactions, transfer and commissions involving agents. And that's something that so many are keen to focus on, not least FIFA. And as I mentioned, probably one, if not the most important statistic in this report is that there was a decrease of more than 20% in agent commissions for this period. And I am just amazed. Not by the decrease so much, but by the fact that FIFA haven't tried to claim credit for that, rather than deflect away from the fact that the figure has actually decreased. Yet it is interesting that roughly only 16% of those agents licensed by FIFA were involved in international transfers, according to reports. FIFA also highlighted an increase in transfers where both clubs involved employed an agent. Not necessarily the same agent, that isn't clear from the report. But FIFA don't place similar emphasis on the reported decrease in agents working for the releasing clubs. But one of FIFA's graphs in the report shows a potential anomaly for me relating to a drop in the percentage of transfers with releasing club agents involved. The only other normal year, taking into account the pandemic, where that occurred was 2015 to 2016, the same year as the implementation of RWWI, the regulations on working with intermediaries, where the year after that, the percentage shot up again. So, could the same bounce happen in 2024 2025 when FFAR has been in place for a similar period of time to that of RWWI back then?
Yes, it could be. And there's also some other factors. We had COVID, and that stopped a lot of deals, 20 to 2022. As I've mentioned in a previous episode, I think the market's changed. There's maybe not as many deals, and clubs are more careful with their money because of the financial rules. But with this report, and I'll just focus firstly on men's football. In 2023, clubs had spent 709.6 million in agent fees. Agents were used in over 2,100 transfers. 1,678 of those transfers involved only an agent for an engaging club. 204 of those transfers involved agents on both sides of the transfer. So it's a small amount, but a lot of people would look at that as multiple representation. And I know you'll cover this a bit later about the top earning agents and which agent received the most money and who handled the most transfers. But I'm interested to know whether FIFA also keeps stats on agencies, not just sole agents here. And I know the license is individual. We do see a lot of reports and rankings of top agencies, but I wonder if FIFA keeps stats on agencies and what they're doing in the market. Very interesting one for me, Jonathan, is that 1,196 out of a total of 7,558 licensed football agents have provided football agent services to and received service fees from clubs in an international transfer. That's about 20% are doing club deals. That looks like a trend that's growing because it's seen maybe as more lucrative, especially as well as the caps are on ice in most countries, that is. What I do like, and I've seen a dissection somewhere, we focus on other markets. So not just the big markets. And I read this on LinkedIn. There's a legal counsel from Lokomotiv Zagreb, I believe, Hrvoje Cabraja, who done some good work in breaking down, for example, in this case, Croatia is an export country. And he broke down how it works there, where spending in 2024 had dropped from 2023 from 10 million to less than 1.5 million. And the number of agents in international transfers involving Croatian clubs, which is an export market, decreased from 34 to 19 in 2023. So is the new FIFA regulatory framework only allowing licensed football agents to perform agent services? Is that an impact? There's a reduction in the number of agents doing deals. And agents basically in that market, just like a lot of markets, the majority of fees are coming from clubs selling players into other markets. He also briefly benchmarked the Croatian market with similar markets, where Croatia had 1.36 million in agent fees. That's 5.4% of the transfer money. Whereas Serbia had 12.3% of the transfer money being paid in agent fees, 8.93 million. So huge difference there. And another market that's benchmarked there was Poland, where 1.62 million was paid to agents, which is 2.7 of the overall transfer revenue. So there are big discrepancies in different countries. And this is important information because I want to turn to the agent perspective that new and current agents, not just in England and the big markets, Portugal, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, they've got to look at these other figures, just like Croatia here, I've given the example. Is there enough business or transfer funds in those markets to run a sustainable business? And I'll just finish on this point, Jonathan, that Hrvoje Cabraja, he also looked at some other smaller markets, for example, Albania, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Montenegro, and not one single agent-related transaction by clubs was reported in 2023-24. So interesting how this report goes a bit more deep dive of what's happening in all the different spaces, Jonathan.
Yeah, and that's important. Is there enough work to go around? And in terms of spending on club agents, I'll just highlight some points in the report on that. Is that 9% of all transactions involving club agents, so 196 for this period, agent service fees exceeded 1 million US dollars, and that accounts for 60.5% of the total paid by clubs to all agents, and at least one case of agent service fees exceeding 16 million US dollars. And here is a phrase you don't hear me say too often. I agree with FIFA in that the cases of seemingly excessive agent commissions needs to be addressed, but the approach of FIFA in using an FFAR sledgehammer to crack a peanut is wrong. And as we and others have said for years, this approach largely punishes the majority, in this case 91% it would seem, who arguably aren't participating in such excessive or abusive practices. The report then states that there were 25 cases of triple representation and 840 cases of dual representation. And the only surprise for me there is how low the numbers actually were. Probably caused in the confusion over FFAR inconsistencies and suspensions in terms of what is permitted and what is not in recent years. One agent amassed 40 representations in the year, not necessarily getting a commission on all of those, we must point out, whilst another agent amassed 16 million US dollars in commissions in the year from 27 transactions. Yes, that averages out at around about 600,000 US dollars per transaction, which is not bad work if you can get it. But if you think that is a good year, another agent, and get this, accumulated, according to the report, a total of 40 million US dollars in service fees in 1 year. But we don't know from the report if that was one transaction, 40 transactions, or anywhere in between.
That is a very good analysis, Jonathan. I think what comes out of this is the big trend that this report shows is a lot more agents want to work on the club side of things as brokers, intermediaries, club agents. I mean, the most deals go through UEFA and over 1,702 transfers with engaging club agents, and releasing club agents were used in 432 transfers. Even in Asia, the AFC, we're seeing a big upswing of transfers with engaging clubs having an agent over 111. And that's one of the major surges in activity, I would say. Club agent services being used much more. I will say this, we mentioned earlier about the total spending on club agent services had seen a notable decline of 20.2% compared to 2023. This is interesting because there's an absence of a fee cap now still. So someone questions, do we need regulatory measures about the fee cap? Because there's already been a reduction in the amount of fees spent on club agent services generally. So that's an interesting point. In terms of an interesting stat was the Netherlands had the highest share of incoming transfers that involved an engaging club agents with 46.7, whereas Serbia, who I mentioned earlier, had the greatest share of outgoing transfers with a releasing club agent involved in 30.3.
But that is mainly the clubs, and a topic that particularly concerns me and has concerned me ever since FIFA started to take us on this magical mystery tour. That is the development and implementation of FFAR. And that is agents representing players, because I believe that from the very conception of the FFAR, it actually degraded the focus on adequate representation of players by agents, if not, even opens up the possibility of more players being exploited. So for a variety of reasons, including the impact of FFAR, I wasn't surprised to see again in this report a startlingly low number of international transfers where agents had reportedly acted on behalf of players. And this was just under 14% of all transfers that had actually decreased on 2023 by 7.6%. And that, from this report, is the biggest annual drop. Well, at least since 2014, and I don't know if they have records from before then. And I have to ask, is there a neglect of adequate advice, support and representation for players in international transfers? And maybe that also extends to domestic transfers, which, as you said, aren't covered by this report. And as I've said for several years now, I think FFAR in its current form will also exacerbate the problem of this lack of adequate representation for players. But on that point, it was interesting to see that whilst there was a drop in player agents involved in the men's game in terms of transfers, this was reversed in the women's game, where although it is still, for me, a surprisingly low figure for agents representing players, it is almost double the percentage of those involved in men's transfers representing players, and has actually slightly risen for this reporting period on the preceding year.
Yeah, you mentioned that those agents acting on behalf of players. The report says 3,105 international transfers, which is 13.7 of all transfers, and it was a decrease of over 7%. Is that the shift more to club agency or broking? I'm not sure. What I found quite interesting is we've still got double and triple representations. There was a mention of 25 triple representations, player, engaging, and releasing club. Quite interesting. It's still there, but obviously they would have had the consent anyway. But FIFA is aware of that. They wouldn't have put in the report anyway. And so there's a lot of good information here where it's all trending. And maybe when we get the finalization of the decision in the caps, we'll have a more reflective picture of what's happening in the agent's business. What I do want to see in this report is coaches' agents. What's going on in the coaching space? Because they're our clients as well, and those transactions and what fees are earned in relation to that, because they need to be disclosed. So that's something that I'm sort of interested in. But overall, the reports I think is getting better, especially on the transactional side, Jonathan.
But as with a lot of FIFA reports and documents, this report is open to a lot of interpretation, and in many ways, it generates more questions than answers. And these include, and I've just got a few examples here, and I want to know your thoughts on these, Peter. And the first one is if 15.8% of agents provide services to clubs and 20% to players, does that mean that just under 36% of international transfers actually involve a licensed agent, if we exclude the possible aspect of dual representation? And then, more importantly, do we conclude a lot of the others, arguably a large majority, involve unlicensed agents, or that agent involvement is going undeclared? Then there's some specifics. Club agents in France seemingly don't receive as higher commissions when compared to those in some other territories, according to the report, not least in Brazil, where they seemingly receive higher commissions when being a club agent. In Sweden, whilst agent fees are similar for representing engaging or releasing clubs, the releasing clubs' fees seem to be double that of the engaging clubs. And this is from the fact that a higher proportion of releasing clubs actually work with agents. And there's a similar pattern evident to this in the Netherlands, but rather than double, it's almost 4 times in that case. But then we see a contrary market effect possibly evident in Spain, with the proportion of clubs with agents whether releasing or engaging, again being similar numbers, yet the agent fees paid there by engaging clubs are the reverse and almost double that of the releasing clubs. And in women's football, there's also little nuggets to consider from this report, such as it seems that Swedish and French agents lead the way in representing clubs in terms of the number of transfers, but as a collective, the Swedish agents could be interpreted from the report to do financially better when it comes to the actual service fees. But then when you look at the top 5 nationalities for player agents for the number of transfer in the women's game, strangely, neither Sweden or France feature. So just to sum up, I like to see this report as useful. And as I recall, this is a damn sight better than last year's report. And I think all agents and those involved in the football agency world would benefit in some way from having a look at it, whether it be just from the viewpoint of understanding the current industry landscape better, or possibly identifying trends and opportunities. But until FIFA actually release the raw data and or let some independent data experts look at it, after all, many at FIFA, including Mr. Infantino and his lieutenants, talk about transparency a lot of the time, this report and others like it are open to a huge amount of interpretation, and with that, misinterpretation and skew. And that is often used as an anti-agent narrative by some at FIFA, especially with the FFAR saga that has been ongoing for several years now.
I think this report, though, does mesh two things together, which make it quite interesting comparatively to other reports. One is obviously the licensing and how many agents are registered, and we looked at enforcement compliance, and then looks at the business side. So we've got the regulatory and the business side, who's doing the deals, which countries, how many agents providing service to clubs and to players. And you mentioned that just under 36% of international transfers that actually involve an agent, about 16% for the agents provide service to clubs, about 22 players. Is it because there's unlicensed agents still involved, or the information's not been recorded of agents who are involved? But it may also be partly players are doing their own deals, especially older players. Sometimes once you're 26, 27, you've been there, done that, you do your own deal if you're confident the club will pay and you know what you're doing. And also a lot of the contracts are standard. So we maybe sometimes forget that. You actually also mentioned, Jonathan, a very good point. There's a big upswing in women's professional football, over $3 million USD spent on services of club agents in women's football, which is 2.2 times higher than the previous year. That's good to see. Interesting anomaly is we know that British agents in this report lead with 304 transfers, followed by Italian agents 241 and French agents 220. But you mentioned the French don't seem to be earning that much in fees. I know they've got a cap of 10%, but compared to how many transfers they've been involved in, seems to be quite low. In fact, it's not the British agents who are the top country by service fees. It's the Italian agents who are close to 98 million. But I like to look at two markets of interest. Saudi Arabia. What are the stats coming out from Saudi Arabia? So they're a buying country, transferring players in. And then there's also Denmark is another one that I looked at. They're a stepping stone selling market for agents. And I had a look at the stats for Saudi Arabia. That 43.5 million in agent fees were paid for incoming transfers. But then I turned to Denmark. I thought the outgoing would be a majority of the agent fees, agents involved in releasing clubs, but it's actually the incoming in terms of Denmark bringing in players. 34.1% of clubs dealt with club agents in deals, so 6.4 million agent fees, which is quite interesting. And that's what I think this report has improved and evolved. So we're getting these figures in other markets that interest us.
Note there was no FIFA graph comparing annual changes in agent commissions when compared to training compensation and solidarity payments in this particular report, which as we know is a FIFA favourite for presentations and reports, but maybe that flawed narrative from FIFA has been debunked once too often, even for FIFA officials to continue to spout such utter nonsense.
Yes, I think that was for a long time. There was this comparative analysis, agent fees versus training compensation comparison. And it was used to argue that money was leaving the game via agents. Good to see that that comparison is not being made, because we do know that agents invest so much into the game, so much into pathways and opportunities. But there are some other important insights in the report, and I'll just close on this. And these are more the national insights that FIFA's introduced a tool for assessing national football agent regulations. Early on in our podcast, we went through a lot of the national FFAR regulations, and now there's a depository set up by FIFA. You can access those. And also one interesting one, and I think this is a good improvement, FIFA launched a new section providing information on the legal minimum age for signing professional contracts in each member association. Very important when a player can become professional or receive a scholarship or whatever in that country.
Yeah, and also that signing of a contract is very important for agents, because that affects when you can sign a representation agreement with a player based on that professional contract and the date that they can sign that. And as this episode of The Agent's Angle was recorded closely off the back of the previous episode, there are no new announcements as such at the time of recording. But just to let you know, the next scheduled episode of The Agent's Angle is due to go out on the 2nd of February. So with that, from me, it's bye for now.
I just want to remind everyone, please share our podcast, look at our social channels. We use LinkedIn quite a bit, and also Instagram, participate in agent-related polls on LinkedIn. We're always interested in finding out the views and trends. And also we've got some interesting guests coming up. It's a bye from me, but I wish you also all the best this transfer window.
The purpose of the Agent's Angle podcast is to provide news, information and facilitate discussion on regulatory matters, policies, business trends and issues affecting football agents worldwide. The opinions and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information only and should never be considered legal or professional advice. Furthermore, the views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. Thank you for listening.